Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into something I think we can all relate to: habits. We're going beyond just good and bad habits, though. We've got some seriously fascinating research about how those everyday actions actually work, and I have to say, my morning routine may never be the same.
Yeah, it's way more than just willpower, right? The research you shared really digs deep into the science behind how habits form, and it's surprisingly complex. We'll be breaking down some key strategies from the research, like these things called implementation intentions. Have you ever heard of that?
Implementation intentions. Can't say I have. Is this where I need like a whiteboard and a PhD to keep up?
Not at all. It's a pretty simple concept when you get down to it. But before we get into the how-tos of changing habits, let's start with a real-world example. One of the studies you sent looked at researchers in Great Britain who wanted to find a better way to help people exercise more consistently. So they split people into three groups.
Okay, so far sounds like a pretty classic study setup. Let me guess. Group 1 gets a lecture on the benefits of exercise. Group 2 gets like a motivational pep talk. And what's the twist for Group 3?
Group 3 got specific. They weren't just told, go exercise more. Instead, they were told to create what's called an implementation intention. Think of it as a super detailed pre-commitment. They literally wrote down something like, during the next week, I will partake in at least 20 minutes of vigorous exercise on day at time and place. No room for interpretation there.
So it's not just about wanting to hit the gym, it's about deciding exactly when and where it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Interesting. But did it actually work? Like, did people actually follow through?
The results are pretty incredible, actually. This simple act of planning more than doubled their exercise rates compared to the other two groups. Those other groups who just tracked workouts or learned about the benefits, they didn't see nearly as much improvement.
Wow, that's a huge difference. It seems kind of counterintuitive, though, right? You'd think the biggest factor would be motivation, not just scheduling.
Motivation is definitely important, don't get me wrong. But, it can be so fleeting. What's fascinating here is that implementation intentions take the pressure off needing to rely on willpower at the moment. When that specific time and place arrives, your brain already has a plan. It's like you've outsourced the decision-making ahead of time.
Oh, I like that.
Mm.
It's like I've already made the decision so my brain doesn't have to. So instead of spending all that mental energy debating whether or not I feel like meditating, I could create an implementate intention like I will meditate for 10 minutes at 7 a.m. in my living room, and then bam, it just happens. Like I'm outsmarting my own brain.
Exactly. It takes the guesswork out of forming a habit and cuts down on what's called cognitive load. Our brains love efficiency, so by pre-programming that desired action, you make it way more likely to actually happen.
That's brilliant. Okay, but hold on. What about those days where everything goes sideways and my schedule is totally thrown off? Do these implementation intentions still work when things get unpredictable?
That is a fantastic question, and it actually leads us to another super interesting concept from your research, the Diderot effect. Basically, it shows how interconnected our habits really are, and how even one small change can sometimes trigger a cascade of other changes and not always intentionally.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. The Diderot effect. Tell me more.
It's named after this French philosopher, Denis Diderot, and it all started, believe it or not, with a robe, a really, really nice one.
A robe. This is starting to sound more like a fashion podcast than a deep dive into habits.
Just wait, it'll make sense. So Diderot, he gets this amazing scarlet robe as a gift, right? And he's totally over the moon about it. But then something interesting happens. He starts to feel like all his other stuff, his furniture and things, they just look shabby and out of place next to this fancy new robe.
Oh, so one nice robe like threw off his whole vibe. Yeah, I get
Yeah.
that. Like when I get new shoes, suddenly I feel like I need a whole new outfit to go with them.
Exactly. So what does Diderot do? He ends up upgrading everything. Furniture, rugs, artwork, the whole nine yards, all to match the elegance of this robe. And this chain reaction of upgrades, a lot of times it's not even intentional, but that's what we now call the Diderot effect.
Okay, so I get the whole Diderot effect thing with the robe and the upgrades, but how does a philosopher's shopping spree, how does that relate back to our habits?
Okay, so think about it. Let's say you nail that 7 a.m. meditation habit using your intention, right? You're feeling calmer, more focused, all that good stuff. Maybe then you decide, hey, I'm going to swap out my sugary breakfast for a healthier option to kind of match that Zen feeling. What I'm saying is one positive change can trigger another, and before you know it, your whole morning routine has been transformed.
Okay, now I see the connection. The Diderot effect, it's not just about material things, right? It's more about how one shift, even something small, can ripple out and affect other habits too. like an upgrade cascade for your whole life.
Exactly. And those ripples, they can work in both directions. Let's say your exercise routine gets messed up because work is crazy busy that week. That break in the pattern, it can lead to other good habits falling apart too, you know? The Diderot effect shows us just how interconnected our behaviors really are.
So it sounds like we need a good strategy to make sure those ripples are working for us, pushing us toward the habits we actually want to build.
Yeah.
Is that where this habit stacking thing comes in?
You got it. One of the articles you sent, it describes habit stacking as a way to basically piggyback new habits onto the ones you already have, which makes them way more likely to stick. You're not relying on just willpower anymore. You're tapping into the power of those routines that are already built in.
Okay, break it down for me. How does habit stacking actually work? Walk me through it.
It's super simple, really. Every habit, it follows this neurological loop. Cue, craving, response, reward. The cue, that's the trigger, like you pour your coffee. The craving, that's you wanting the reward, that caffeine kick. The response, that's the action, taking that first sip. And the reward, well, that's that feeling of alertness and satisfaction you get.
So what you're saying is, with habit stacking, we find a solid cue in our existing routine, something we already do, and then attach the new behavior to it. So instead of after I pour my coffee, I drink it, it becomes after I pour my coffee, I meditate for a minute, then I drink it.
You got it. You're working with an existing neurological loop, making it much easier for your brain to pick up the new behavior. The key here is choosing a cue that happens consistently every single time without fail. The things you do without even thinking, like brushing your teeth or getting dressed.
So if I want to start flossing regularly, which I really should, I could stack that onto my nighttime teeth brushing routine. After I brush my teeth, I will floss. I'm already there at the sink, toothbrush in hand. It's like the perfect setup.
Perfect example. And to really make it stick, you can supercharge that cue by making it obvious, you know? Like put your floss right next to your toothbrush where you literally can't miss it. Visual reminders, they work wonders.
Okay, this is starting to click. But doesn't the reward part matter too? How do I make sure my new habit, like flossing, is rewarding enough that I'll actually stick with it?
You're totally right. That reward, it's key to reinforcing the habit loop. But it doesn't have to be this big, elaborate thing. It can be something as simple as that feeling of, hey, I did it. Or checking something off your list, or even just how fresh your mouth feels after you floss.
So it's about those smaller internal rewards, the ones that really matter to me. What works for one person might not work for another, right?
100%. And, you know, you can also get creative with external rewards, especially when you're first building a habit. Maybe you reward yourself with a chapter of your favorite book after a week of consistent flossing, like a little bonus to keep you going while those internal rewards start to kick in.
I love this. It's like I'm playing a game and leveling up my habits, earning rewards along the way. But before I get carried away with flossing and fantasy novels, let's go back to habit stacking for a sec.
Yeah.
Is there a limit, like how many habits can I realistically stack at once?
It's not really about quantity. It's about finding what you can actually keep up with. If you try to change everything at once, you're going to burn out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Start small, maybe 1 or 2 new habits stacked onto those cues you already have. Once those feel automatic, like second nature, then you can think about adding more.
Yeah, that's a good point. Small changes, but do them consistently, and that's how you get big results. I'm already starting to feel like I have more control over my daily routine. But before we get too excited, can we talk about the flip side for a minute? Like, are there any downsides to this whole habit hacking thing? Can implementation intentions ever backfire? Welcome back to the deep dive. My brain is officially full of habit hacks, in a good way, of course. But before we wrap things up, I want to go back to those potential downsides we were talking about. Are there any situations where implementation intentions could actually work against you?
Yeah, that's a smart question. While implementation intentions are super effective generally, they can make things a little too rigid sometimes if you're not careful. Life happens, right? Things come up. So if your intention is super specific, like I'll hit the gym for 30 minutes at 6 p.m. on the dot, and then something unexpected pops up, you can end up feeling like you failed.
So it's almost like I'm setting myself up for disappointment if I don't bake in some wiggle room.
Yeah. Right. The key is finding that balance between being specific and being able to adapt when you need to. Maybe instead of 6 p.m. sharp, your intention is, I'll get in at least 20 minutes of exercise sometime after work. That way you've got your plan, but you can also move things around if your day goes sideways.
Gotcha. So it's about finding that sweet spot between having a structure but also being flexible. What about habit stacking? Any traps to watch out for there?
One thing to keep in mind is stacking too many habits onto a single cue. It's kind of like overloading a circuit, you know? Eventually, something's got to give. If your morning routine suddenly involves like 5 new habits all triggered by your alarm clock, it's probably not going to last.
So less is more when it comes to habit stacking.
Pretty much. Start with 1 or 2 new habits, make sure those are solid, and then you can think about gradually adding more as you go. It's also super important to pick cues that are really consistent. If your cue is like, when I see my neighbor walking his dog, and then your neighbor goes on vacation for a week, well, your whole habit stack just crumbles.
All right, it's got to be something super reliable, like the sun coming up or my alarm going off in the morning.
Mm.
Speaking of cues, you mentioned earlier that there's a whole strategy for figuring out the best ones for habit stacking. Can we dig into that a little bit more?
Absolutely. One of your sources, it recommends this exercise. It's really simple, but it works. You make 2 lists. The first list is all about your current habits, the things you do every day without even thinking. Stuff like waking up, brushing your teeth, making coffee, getting to work, having lunch. Just map out your typical day step by step.
Okay, so like a master list of my current routine, I can handle that. What about the second list? What goes on that one?
Okay, this one focuses on those external cues, the
Yeah.
things that happen consistently around you, regardless of what you're doing. Things like the sun coming up, your phone ringing, getting an email notification, a specific song ending on your playlist, even traffic getting bad on your commute.
Interesting. Those don't seem directly related to habits, but
Uh-uh.
I guess, yeah, they happen consistently, so that makes them good triggers.
Exactly. By adding those external cues into your habit stacks, you're tapping into a whole new level of consistency. Like, let's say you want to start a daily gratitude practice. Instead of just saying, oh, I'll do it sometime today, you can stack it onto the sun setting.
So my implementation intention becomes, after the sun sets, I'll take 1 minute to think about 3 things I'm grateful for.
I love that. It's like using the natural rhythm of the day to anchor this new habit.
That is a perfect example. You're using an external cue to trigger a positive new behavior. And remember, the more specific you are with your intention, where you're going to do it, how long it'll take, the more likely you are to follow through.
Wow, this has been amazing. I feel like I have a whole new level of control over, well, my entire life, really.
And remember, the best part about all of this is it's totally customizable. You get to choose the cues, the habits, the rewards, whatever works best for you.
This deep dive has been incredible. I'm walking away with a ton of practical strategies to upgrade my daily routine and finally start building those habits I've been putting off forever. And hey, don't sweat it if things aren't perfect right away. It's all about progress, not perfection. You make small changes, do them consistently, and that's how you see those big results down the road.
So, to everyone listening, think about one small habit you'd like to start. What's a cue you already have that you can stack it onto? Where and when will you make it happen? Write down your implementation intention, and let's get started building better habits together.
Until next time, happy habit hacking.